So here we are, come from our wilderness wanderings, dry, parched, dusty, after a week of hard work, dull work perhaps, or no work at all. Tired from your journey, you just want to sit and rest a while, hauling an empty jar in the middle of the day because for one reason or another, the water at home has run out, and whatever the need is, it can't wait until later. So here we are at the well, and we tell each other of a time Jesus visited a well, Jacob's well. And then we might remember something about that ancestor of Jesus, Jacob, when he met his beloved Rachel at a well while she was herding sheep. Like water to a thirsty body, love can be found and enlivens a body through these waters. But let's not romanticize the situation. This is the real world, and real people are living here. Where water is life, water can also be contested and fought over. There at Jacob's well, almost 1,800 years after Rachel and Jacob met and were attracted to each other and eventually married, but as you might remember, they got to marry after Jacob first married Rachel's older sister Leah. And then Joseph fathered children, first with Leah and then with two enslaved women, Zilpah and Bilhah, and then eventually Rachel. And finally, all these 800 years later, two of their descendants, now a Jewish man and a Samaritan woman, meet at the well. Both Jews and Samaritans trace their lineage, their nationalities and religions to the ancient King David, and before him to Moses and the patriarchs and matriarchs like Jacob and Rachel. About 800 years before this particular Jewish man and Samaritan woman meet at the well, King David's kingdom had been split in two, divided between Judah on the south and Israel in the north. The capital city of Judah was Jerusalem, and the capital of the northern kingdom was the city of Samaria. So eventually the northerners became known as Samaritans. Each nation's priests and scribes interpreted the scriptures, including the Ten Commandments and the prophecies of the coming of the Messiah, in ways that fortified their own sense of each person's and people's right as the proper and faithful keepers of the covenants of God with their ancestors. Each nation had prophets also that criticized the dominant ideologies in both nations, and the prophets of the north and the south decried the injustices that the peoples perpetrated upon one another, and the prophets denounced how the nation's leaders continued to justify their wars against their enemies and violence on their own people living in poverty by claiming God's name for their own actions. So here we are at the well, with sex and theology and politics swirling all around. And we haven't even heard the conversation between the Jewish man and the Samaritan woman. We're only at verse 7 out of 42. This is the longest conversation between Jesus and another person in the entire Bible. And we can plumb the depths of this conversation for all our lives and find surprising grace and steadfast love welling up every time we hear it. Perhaps that's one of the most important things, is that this is a conversation. Jesus listens to the woman. He engages her, takes her seriously. She asks him questions. She stands her ground. She questions his ideologies and theologies. It's a conversation. And Jesus wants a conversation with you, a dialogue back and forth. And Jesus will cross every national, religious, ethnic, and gender boundary to talk and listen with you. It's integral to part of Jesus' mission. It's who he is and what he does. This whole gospel story starts off by saying that Jesus had to go to Samaria. Well, he didn't exactly have to. Almost all of the other Jews of his day went around Samaria. They wanted to avoid the dangers of traveling through the contested territories. Jesus had to go through Samaria because it was part of God's mission to save and love the whole world, not just a part of it. In conversation with us, Jesus will boldly ask us to serve him, give him a drink of water. This man, by the well, defined by our customs as a wayfaring traveler, by our religion perhaps as a misguided and even unfaithful person, and perhaps by our laws as an alien foreigner. Jesus, defined in all those ways, provocatively asks us to provide him with hospitality. This is surprising because it's not just a one-way street. It's not just a one-way conversation. Just like the conversation has mutuality, the service has mutuality too. Later on in the Gospel according to John, Jesus will call his disciples no longer slaves, but friends. He will give them food to eat and drink to receive that quenches their thirst for all eternity. He will kneel at their feet and wash them. Then we may start to question and argue with Jesus. And when we do, Jesus takes us seriously and all our questions about God and religion and politics and even sex. He doesn't laugh it off or get defensive. Jesus engages us. He challenges our assumptions and takes our conversation often to a deeper level. Jesus takes our theological questions in stride and asks us if something deeper might be going on. Take the part of the conversation about the 5 husbands and the man the woman is with now who is not her husband. On the surface, we might think that this is just about faithfulness in human relationships or the transitoriness of human mortality and life. But this man and this woman at the well do take the conversation immediately to a deeper level about God's faithfulness to the people and their faithfulness to God. So even if we've been wandering around worshiping here or there, or not even worshiping at all, this conversation suddenly becomes about God's journey with us. Maybe you were raised in a family that didn't go to church, even if you had maybe even technically been a member of the rolls. Maybe you went with your friends to the high school church parties at the neighborhood church. In college, maybe you read the great philosophers Plato and Sappho and the others. Or maybe you've gotten involved in a non-denominational church for a while in your early 20s. And a few times, maybe you've experienced that awesome, terrifying, and beautiful power that's alive in the world and you just can't quite name it. Maybe when you were boldly intimate with a lover, or when your friend died too young and too soon, or when you heard the waterfalls trickling through the hills or crashing over the mountain cliffs. And then one day, perhaps, you walked by and it was about noon and there was an Ash Wednesday service going on. And you walked on in and you heard the preacher talk about dust and water and mud and lives blessed by God, the source and ground of all being. All throughout your journey, while for one reason or another, by choice and sometimes just by chance, you went from spiritual to non-spiritual experience, God, the source of all life, has been with you, faithful to you, and to the whole of you, not just one part of you that can be defined by your nationality or your gender or anything else, but the whole of you, your complex and simple, mixed up and ugly, beautiful you. Jesus' conversation with you works at all levels. It might be about who Jesus is, who God is, who you are, and who your relationships are with. Jesus might also want you in this conversation to consider how your spiritual life with God and your relationships with other human beings are intimately related. Could accepting the proposal of God's faithfulness to you make you both more free and more committed in your personal relationships? We believe and know and accept that God's steadfast love for us helps us rise above our codependent and even unhealthy and oppressive sinful behaviors. In the past, people understanding their relationship with God as being married to God helped women be free from the oppression of men in their lives, and helped slaves overcome nationalist and oppressive ideologies. A woman married to God was free of any human being. The Samaritan woman, she no longer is told that she has to be married to anyone. Mary Magdalene, likewise. The saints and martyrs like Perpetua and Felicity, intellectuals and scientists and theologians like Teresa of Avila and Hildegard von Bingen, all found their committed relationship with God liberation for their life here and now. And also, God's fidelity to us has been a source of inspiration for relationships within marriage. Martin Luther and other Protestant theologians who found and received joy and grace in the bold intimacy of marriage realized, as the Lutheran hymn writer John Ylvasacker wrote, that God's faithfulness and grace is what makes the verses rhyme between us and our beloved from dusk till rising sun. When Jesus is having a conversation with us, he doesn't just answer with an ideology that keeps us separated from or colonizing each other. Instead, Jesus calls and sends both the woman and his wayfaring disciples to have conversations with their neighbors and even their enemies. For a new time is coming and is already here, says Jesus. So he invites you and calls you forth with courage to profess your faith in God, your trust in that ever-abiding relationship, and in the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And then the spring of healing waters begin to flow and bubble and well up, and your life is refreshed and livened and connected to the source of all life, eternal and abundant. Life overflowing so much that you have to share it. And so Jesus sends you as an apostle of the good news. You don't have to have it all figured out or be a perfect example of righteousness. Neither the woman or the disciples did. But Jesus calls and blesses you to be an evangelist of the good news anyway. Just share your experience and all the questions you have of this divine and wonderful life welling up inside of you and throughout the world. Listen to the Samaritan woman at the well and let her be your model. Come and see. Could this be? Amen.